let's finally get started looking at code. I apologize again for the introduction, but I think it is important to introduce the subject matter accordingly also so you know what to expect in the next couple of videos. I think it is good to start with the outline of the project itself. That's actually what I do in the book as well. If you really, really want to start from scratch, you have to look at how do you outline your project on your hard disk, right? So what I do is I have my book orders right here. That's what I call the project. And I have a binary directory where all my binaries are being generated. And then we have the VCL folder with everything for the VCL application. As a pet peeve of mine, I once again go into source. So I have all my source files there. And then I have like resources with resources like the icon that I created or SQL statements to initialize the database. And these are the source files for the icon. That's my resource folder. And then in source, that's where I more or less store the whole VCL application, the SQL statements. I have an additional SQL folder. So that's for the VCL application. And then I have another folder, web, where I have the source files of my web application. If I go up to the root folder again, I also add git attributes, git ignore. There's videos for these from Holger, and also, again, the book. And this is, I promise, it's the last time I'm going to say, and also the book, because the modern software development with Delphi covers literally the same steps that we're covering right now, but in more detail, and also for a project that uses object relational mapping, has more separation of user interface and data model, and goes way, way deeper than we could do this here at How It Works with Holger. We'll do so in the course that I'll release associated with a book, and also the book is ready for pickup. Promise, last time I'm mentioning it, and let's keep going. In the root folder, I also put the project group. The project group contains the web project and the VCL project. If I were to create a web service API with Xdata, which I'm not doing now, I didn't want to create a web service API because the content is static, more or less. How often do I publish a new book? I published 2 last year. I doubt I'm going to be able to keep that pace of publishing 2 books a year. So more or less, the data changes once a year, let's say. So it doesn't make any sense to run a web service for that if every web service basically returns the same thing. The list of books, for example, is not going to change. So it's fine deploying a JSON document onto a server, which doesn't only save basically development time because I don't need to develop a web server and with web services. It also saves cost with regards to deployment. I can literally put this JSON file into my Git repository and publish that using the GitHub pages. Again, there's also how it works about that, how I use GitHub to deploy your content. And then the binary directory contains all the executables, in this case only one. And this is something I haven't shared with you yet. We're going to use a SQLite database. So the SQLite database is going to be in this directory as well. So we don't have any settings. It's just going to assume, the application is just going to assume that the database is going to be created in the binary directory. If your administrator has different regulations that you can't create the database in the binary directory, that it should be created in the documents directory, just change the path. I'm not going to fight with anybody, but this is just like for us here in the example. And for me personally, that's the easiest way to do it. I have my binary and I have my database. I know security-wise, you might want to have the database somewhere else. But again, we want to keep the example easy to reproduce as well. With that being said, how do we find the database? Let's look at the AppGlobals. And that is a class that contains everything that the application needs at any point in time. That's what I think AppGlobals should encompass. And in this case, for this application, is only the database file name. And I declared this as a class function, meaning I can write in source code t_appglobals.databaseFilename to call this function, and I use get library path. And there's already a modification that I didn't realize. In Delphi 12, we get, if I don't type the wrong character, we get app path. Great, huh? So we finally can forget about library path, which is, I think, because this has been implemented at the same time when FireMonkey already existed, and FireMonkey mobile development executables are no different than libraries, so to speak. So the library path is also the application directory. So get library path literally gives you in a VCL application the application path, and this is what you now get with this if you wanted to. I'm going to keep it like this so it still compiles with Delphi 11, but you're able now to use get app path. That's new. And then we combine this, great function. Don't even bother thinking about like backward slashes, forward slashes, forget about it. Just combine the library path with books.db, and that should yield this path right here so you can access your database. And that is literally all you need for globals here. We could also add a class function for caption of the main form. Sorry for stumbling there a bit. And we could also add version information, these kind of things. The version information is also part of the project. But again, there might be a book that does that in detail. And with that, our globals are done. So you wonder, where do I use this? Well, I use this in the database manager. And this is where it gets interesting. Okay, so the database manager contains all the queries and all data sources. You might think, well, shouldn't data sources be on a form? You might add to that. Well, there's the thing. As soon as you have master detail relationship in your database, you need the data source, right? So if we want to have a data set that depends on another data set, we need to have access to the data source. So the data source has to be on the data module. Okay, so you can think about adding a different data source on your form if you don't want to use or access the data source from the data module, if you really want to separate everything. But in this case, these data sources are all needed in order to basically access the primary table if you have details that basically depend on it. So if you navigate in the books table, for example, we want to show all the additions in the additions table. That is automatic. You can do that with FireDAC, and I'll show you how. The connection is the first thing we have to look at. That's the database connection to the SQLite database. And then here, the SQLite, which you find here, is a TFD physical SQLite driver link. Mouthful, I know. What does that thing do? Well, to be honest, in the old days, it just made sure that the proper units were added to the users clause, like these, for example. But nowadays, you get a little bit more. You get the ability to link the SQLite database into your executable. That's one of the things that you can do. So I literally did that. So this way, you know your executable contains the SQLite runtime library. What's the SQLite runtime library? This is an experiment. I probably have that 100 times on my computer. So SQLite 3 DLL. So every application that uses SQLite usually deploys a SQLite 3 DLL. And that's the reason why a lot of people don't embed the SQLite library into their executable anymore, because it's on the computer anyways. However, this gives you the opportunity to embed the SQLite 3 DLL from your developer machine into the executable, and your application runs as is without any libraries. Just as why we love Delphi, right? So you embed the database drivers and everything into your executable, and for that you have to drop the SQLite component and have to change the engine linkage accordingly. All the other stuff, not really our concern. It has to do with encryption, or if you want to point to a certain DLL somewhere. These components are available for other stuff as well. For example, if you go MySQL, you have the MySQL driver link, and you can see same thing. You can point to the MySQL DLL. You can't link MySQL into the executable yet. Blink, blink. Hopefully soon. I'm kidding. I don't know if anything like that will happen or can happen, because MySQL obviously is not a file database. It's a server database. And most recently, they do not provide compiled DLLs anymore. So it's a little bit tougher on the Windows side to get these libraries. So it would be appreciated if FireDuck allowed us to link the database drivers into the framework, or even better, no longer to depend on these libraries. But hopefully we'll see some development here. For SQLite, it's perfect already, in my opinion, because we can link it into the executable. So how do we set up the connection? And that is first login prompt. Remove that true. You don't want to get username and password as soon as you connect. Like if you leave this on here, then you connect, you get the dialog, username, password. You don't want that, because SQLite, the database that we're using, is not going to use username or password. And I also set the connected stored usage, everything to false, because the states that I have at design time, I don't care about them. So what happens is I end up with a fresh connection without any predefined settings when it comes to the connected state when the application launches, meaning it's false. And there is just the thing, if you double click on it, I set it to SQLite, and I hard coded it. That's the key thing. I hard coded it to the database that I have, to my books database. Open mode, read write, because we want to read and write. And nice thing is with FireDuck, it highlights everything that has changed. Login mode, normal. That means exclusive is the default, which means if you open your database here, you can't use a database tool at the same time, like IDSQL, for example, or DataGrid from JetBrains. You can't use that at the same time because the file is locked. So normal is better. That means we need a synchronous mode, which is full. Journal mode, I set to off. I don't want any journal. Doesn't make any sense either with a couple of records in there. In string format, Unicode. Okay, because if you have languages like non-American characters, non-ASCII characters, that's what you want, right? So we set it to Unicode. And with that, you have the design time support during the development if you hook it up to your database like that. Of course, if you were to deploy the application like this and you don't make the proper changes in source code, it wouldn't work. So this is what we'll do. So in our create constructor, we get the first thing I do is connection params database is our database file name, AppGlobals database file name. I don't need to initialize AppGlobals because it's a class method, so I can say AppGlobals database file name. Of course, I have to include AppGlobals as a unit. As the next step, I can simply open all the queries that we'll look at later. And when we destroy the data module, I close all the queries. And with regards to the order, I always open the master first, master database, and then the dependent database second. I haven't really read up on that. If that is a requirement, it just makes more sense to me if I open the books first and then the editions, everything, because editions depends on books. So it makes sense to me to open books first. I don't know if that is a requirement. It just makes sense to me. If you see destroy, what's that? Well, I'm also removed the thing that Delphi still adds by default, the var. So I can't access this as DBManager. There is no variable for this. I have to create it. So the database manager has to be created at some point. And I went even farther. I'm basically declared a F instance of the type of this class. I made it strict private so that the form designer or the data module designer doesn't interfere with my declaration here, because everything that follows here would also be considered a class verb, because this is like var here, and this always has an implicit, if you declare variables, it always has an implicit var. So class var would, if I defined other here, would also be a class var, unless I write var here. And if you wonder why I don't just do this, well, the problem is that the form designer might add more here or here, depending on the alphabetical order of things. So in order to circumvent that all, I picked strict private for my variable, and the form designer will keep adding things here in the published section, and autocomplete will keep adding things in private and public. That's the trick here. Class var means it's a class variable, meaning the instance, no, not the instance, meaning the class can access, or the class has an instance of TDBManager. That also implies we need a class destructor and a class function that creates this instance object. And if you wonder what this is designed for, I want to make sure that there's only one database manager in my application. And formally, this is called the Singleton pattern. I want to make sure that there's only one instance in my whole application of database manager. It's always going to be the same. And I want to make sure that it's only going to be created once. And when the application stops, I want to make sure that it's freed from memory. And that can be done using the Singleton pattern. And in Delphi, it can look like this. There's other potentials. I don't prevent the form from being created, or the data module from being created, without my instance method. So you could still call TDBManager create and use it like any other class. I added my stuff. There is implementations, Marco Cantu, Stefan Glinke, they have implementations where they literally overwrite the stuff in a way that you can't call the create constructor anymore. And I don't go that far. This is not about architecture. For me, this is a means to have an easy way to make sure that my class is only used once. And I would probably, if I worked in a team, I would put that into the documentation. And for me, myself, I know if I see this class function shared, I know, okay, I have this is supposed to be a Singleton pattern. And this class function can be called on the class name. So I can call tdbmanager.shared in order to access the one and only instance of this data module. You'll see it in a second. That's exactly the construct that we want to have. The only thing you need to take care of is if shared is called, you have to find out, is f instance assigned yet? And if not, create it. tdbmanager.create. I don't want an owner because I want to manage it myself. And we have to return, as the return value of the function, we have to return f instance. That's it. If you call this a second time, a third time, this will not be created again. You will always return f instance. And this is the reason why there is a second destroy, because the class destructor has to free this f instance, which is, and this is where it gets a little bit crazy and why you certainly have to watch this again and rewind a little bit. This is where f instance is freed, and f instance is of course an instance, sorry for the hectic scrolling here, it's of course an instance of TDBManager. Think about it. The class houses the methods you need in order to create objects of this class. In particular, we only create one object instance of this class. And that means if the application terminates, this is exactly when the class destructor is being called. That's when we free this. This is a very nice implementation, a nice way to phrase things. Back in the day, the first implementation, you still see it in practice every day if you want to be compatible to previous Delphi versions. You see implementations with the initialize and deinitialize of a unit. And the class destructor is literally the thing that you would call in deinitialize when you would basically free the instances that you created globally in your unit. But this, in my opinion, is much, much nicer because you can tie everything to a class, which is TDBManager in this case. So the initialization, if I scroll down here, doesn't exist, and the deinit or deinitialization, I think it's called, doesn't exist either. Everything else in the class, by the way, looks the same. So you can define procedures like in any other class that you implement. You can also have events, and these are called on the instance, right? On the instance, like any other object. The tricky part is that we have a class that also has class methods, and one of these class methods creates the instance of itself. And that needs a little bit to sink in. I realize that. But this pattern allows you to really have great access to your database manager or controller, whatever you want to call it, in order to access your databases. And it makes it, in particular, it makes it very easy to hook up your forms to queries and data sources, because you can access it from anywhere without having to worry about, has it been created yet? Has it not been created yet? Do I need to free it? That's all abstracted off. So this is a very nice pattern for this application that we're building. I realize I haven't even run the application. So let me get that out of the way, that we run it right here. So the books. These are the books. So we have a title, a subtitle, and a publication date. And of course, my friends from TMS have a better grid, much better grid that will make this look so fancy, so great. But I didn't want to add to the length of this video by giving you a hint how to configure the grid and what great opportunities to have. There are videos for the T Advanced String Grid or TDB Advanced Grid from TMS. And again, advertising, right? You're watching something that's free. I have a book about all the grids. So if we go here, multi-tier cross-platform data access, I picked a title that's way too long. That's the problem. For multiple platforms with VCL. And this is like here, become a VCL UI grid control insider. So this is about the T Advanced String Grid in detail from TMS. So if this book gives you all the information you need, if you want to make this look nicer. We have a splitter here that allows me to edit the markdown. And you might wonder, entering markdown, it's fun, but the problem is there is no formatting. My users want formatting. Well, guess what? I wanted to make sure that there's the least possible dependencies. So this can be compiled without having any dependencies to TMS controls. However, I might comment this out so that you can compile it without having that dependency. I wanted to show something for the images, how you can basically resize them easily, quickly, and how you can import a multitude of image formats so that you're not restricted. You also see like this image control looks a little bit different. You can zoom in. So this might be something special. It is. But still, this control here doesn't give you what you see is what you get. It's a simple memo control. And you might think, no, this is actually already, just looking ahead here, this is a TDB advanced memo from TMS. So there is a little bit TMS magic in there. You can replace it with a memo field if you don't have that license. But I wanted the line numbers. And the great thing is that you could write a syntax extension for Markdown, or even better, and I think I have that installed. If I go to memo, there is the TMS FNC memo control, and that has support for Markdown, I think. And then you would be able to have what you see is what you get even for Markdown in here. I just didn't want to add more and more and more. So VCL UI pack made sense to me. And here you see the image control that is being used. It's from the imaging library. And you can easily replace it with a TDB image. That's actually what it was before. The reason why I changed this, I'll give it to you when we do the generation of the JSON and of the Markdown. I wanted some added flexibility that would have taken me much more time to implement because some of my book covers are in different file formats that are not supported by Delphi by default. So I didn't want to add work to me to having to convert these files, and Imogene can read quite a lot of formats, and that's why I included this. I might provide a version for you to download that this is basically replaced with T-image again. I might provide 2 branches. I'm not sure yet, but this is a dependency that you have as well in addition to the BCL UI pack right here. So back to the actual application when it's running. I digressed a little bit. So the stores, same thing, list of stores. You have the ISO code. Why do I need the ISO code? For the flags. Easy, right? So you want to present a flag, you need the ISO code in order to have a flag. And then the domain suffix we need for the store, Amazon.com, Amazon.co.uk, and so on. That's what we need for the store. For the books, by the way, the information we have title, subtitles, and publication date, a description in Markdown. And this grid down here is the editions, color edition, black and white edition. And if I navigate the top one, the bottom one also navigates, basically filters the edition table or query, whatever you want to call it. And finally, and this is the most complex dialog, it will be a separate video, I'm sure, is the availability in stores. So what you have here is that we have all the editions here. Like we have, for example, 2 different editions for the grid book. We have paperback and a hardcover. And hardcover is not available in Japan, Canada, and Australia. Again, Amazon restricted. And we have the paperback available everywhere. Or, for example, as I just explained, the latest book, the black and white edition, is available everywhere. And the color edition is not available in Japan and Australia. That needs to be implemented somehow. I'll show you a pretty straightforward implementation with joins. And then we'll go from there. And then finally, we can save as Markdown, save as JSON. For completion's sake, I'll show it asks for a directory, Markdown directory, select folder. Boom, done. Markdown files have been created. Same for the JSON, save as JSON, books.json, same folder, save. Yes, I would like to replace it. Done. And if I go into the directory that's on FMD, so I type here FMD, I have book 1, book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5 as a Markdown document, and I have the JSON, and I have the covers in 250 pixel size for the Markdown button, not for the JSON. The JSON embeds them. This is just for the Markdown. Of course, you might argue, Holger, you could have referenced from the JSON these, but I think the books in the JSON are even smaller than 250 pixels, so I would have had a second file, and that's exactly the reason why I embedded them. So in this video, we had the AppGlobals, and we looked at the Singleton pattern for the database manager, and how we create the connection, and the SQLite parameters. And next, we'll look at the database structure, and we'll implement the first queries.